Part 41. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 407. Arriving in the guest room, the fat man lay down directly on the bed, stretched out, and asked, "What were you doing in the hall below just now? Do you know those people?" Subai nodded noncommittally. It would be better not to talk about such embarrassing things to Fatty, a big mouth. The fat man took out his mobile phone, looked for the notice in the guest room, and connected to the Wi-Fi. By the way, there was a pretty good new TV series released yesterday called Ghost Blowing the Lamp, the Ancient City. The fat man lit his cell phone while lighting a cigarette for himself with the other hand. Subai happened to walk to the window at this time, opened the curtains and looked down. It was already dusk. The hotel area chosen by the fat man was relatively close to the airport, and it was also considered a suburb of Tianjin, so the hotel area downstairs was on the road. It doesn't look very lively. Of course, this is also because of the winter. Not many people like to run out for nothing, and they all stay at home and blow on the heater. After listening to Fatty's words, Subai smiled and said, "Is it a TV series similar to Tomb Raiders?" "I haven't watched this TV series, but I have watched that TV series, and it's really not that good." The fat man suddenly became interested at this time and echoed, "I have also watched the TV series Tomb Raiders. It is purely to give those young guys a sense of presence, especially those male protagonists with thousand-year-old bangs, not messy. No matter what dangerous things happen, even if it is an explosion, the bangs are always meticulous, which makes me feel embarrassed when I look at Fatty. But this one is different. It basically restores the plot of the original work, and the filming is more sincere. The leading actors are Jin Dong and others, and they are not comparable to those sissies who rely on their faces to make a living. In short, it looks okay, and it is the same as the previous ones. With such a bad predecessor as The Foreshadowing, this one really seems to be a bit independent. Any story you have experienced in the world is more mysterious and thrilling than his entire book, and yet you are still interested in this, Subai teased. This is different. Fatty, I have read this book before I became an audience. This is feelings, do you understand? Damn, it makes me angry just to talk about it. If only you were still the old Mr. Su, it would be great to directly invest in making all my favorite books into TV series and movies. Anyway, hundreds of millions is just drizzle to you. No, for you before, now you can't even afford a plane ticket. Subai didn't want to continue arguing with the fat man. He opened the window and leaned out of the window. "Fat man, what are you having for dinner?" "Anything except gaobuli bayazai will do," the fat man replied. "Then you stay here and continue watching the TV series. I'll go for a walk first. Remember to bring me some food, I'm a little hungry." "If you are hungry, you can eat instant noodles first." Subai walked to the table. There were some drinks and instant noodles here. Of course, they were not free, but had to be charged. After all, every tenant paid a deposit when they checked in. "You can use the room when you check out. I will tell you how many things are in there. Bah, ever since I first met you, the way you taught me how to eat instant noodles has made it impossible for me to look directly at the instant noodles in the hotel room again," the fat man yelled directly. At that time, Subai was still playing CD, and Yigu was still alive. The three people he had just met gathered together to eat, drink and have fun with their own agendas. They were preparing in a hotel before entering a story world. The fat man was preparing to eat the bubbles in the room. Subai jokingly suggested that he turn the bucket of instant noodles upside down and scoop out the bubbles. After eating, he could put the instant noodles upright and put them far away, so that people who came to check out when checking out would think that the instant noodles were intact. No more money after that, and the fat man actually did as he was told. "Remember to come back early," Fatty reminded again. "All right." Subai took out a spare room card and walked out of the room. This hotel was quite high-end. After all, Fatty was embarrassed to take Subai to stay in a small hotel like that. When he got off the elevator, a waiter at the front desk immediately came over and asked Subai if he needed any help. Subai waved his hand and said thank you and walked out. The dry and cold air carried the fragrance of haze, which was pure and authentic. Subai put his hands in his pockets and walked casually along the street. Every time after something happens, Subai likes to be alone and relax. Everyone has their own tolerance limit, and they do need time and space to be alone. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, in front, a girl wearing a red down jacket trotted over carrying a satchel. This girl Subai had met not long ago. She was the enthusiastic girl who distributed zitting shortbread in the hotel lobby. The other party seemed to recognize Subai, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. The two of them just passed each other. She must have left something in the hotel, so she left the teacher and her classmates to come back to pick it up alone. She seemed to be in a hurry. A fire truck was parked on the road on the other side of the street. Several firefighters were maintaining the fire hydrants there. The young man who came to Tianjin from Qinhuangdao by high-speed train at noon was also there. He was indeed a firefighter. I probably just came back today from a vacation in Qinhuangdao to visit relatives. The world is big, but it is also small. Subai is not a sentimental person, but at this time, he can't help but feel that there is indeed something called fate in this world. After 10 years of cultivation, it is not just an empty talk. There should be an invisible and intangible thread connecting people to each other, even if they only meet each other a few times. However, Lan Lin's hysteria before committing suicide quickly emerged in Subai's mind. The word fate actually has a relationship with cause and effect, which is constantly being cut and confused. At the same time, it also means a kind of great terror. After coughing a few times, Subai interrupted his thoughts. He wanted to have the rare luxury of enjoying the tranquility alone, but as expected, he was still thinking about those things. Sometimes, Subai himself couldn't tell whether the real world was the main theme of his life or the story world was his true destination. For ordinary listeners, the time in the real world between each mission is a wonderful vacation for self-psychological healing and relaxation. They wish they could have more of this time, but for people like Subai, it was a bit boring. When he was not in the story world, he felt very uncomfortable. After walking around and looking around, before he knew it, it had been almost an hour since he came out. Subai took a shortcut to go back to the hotel. On the way, he packed some cooked vegetables and bought a few bottles of beer, planning to just have a meal with the fat man. When he returned to the hotel, it was already dark. It was almost 7:30. Subai took out the room card and swiped it. When he pushed the door open, he found that the door was locked with a chain from the inside. Subai frowned slightly, but before he could release his consciousness to investigate the situation, the heavy breathing of a man and a woman and the rhythmic creaking of the bed could be heard from the door. What a breeding pig! Subai stretched out his hand and knocked on the door, signaling the fat man to hurry up. Then he put on his headphones, leaned against the corridor wall, opened a bottle of beer, and drank it one sip after another. A bottle of beer had just been finished. When Subai was about to open the second bottle, the door of the room was opened from the inside. The woman walked out while arranging her hair. When she saw Subai standing outside, her eyes lit up. Apparently, the woman thought that Subai was a guest more in line with her taste, but before she could take the initiative to flirt with Subai, Subai walked into the room and closed the door. The fat man was taking a shower in the bathroom, and the one that belonged to the fat man could still see obvious marks of battle. "Hey, I see you haven't been back for so long," and someone happened to call the guest room again to ask if he wanted a massage service, so I ordered one. The fat man rushed over hastily and walked out wrapped in a bath towel, and brought Subai back directly. The bag of cooked vegetables was untied. "Fat man, that lobster tattoo on your leg is quite nice. Subai took out a piece of tissue and wiped his hands. After hearing this, the fat man lowered his head and looked at his thigh, and then said speechlessly, "Damn, this is a poisonous scorpion tattoo I got when I was not so fat. It's pretty good. Your tattoos are pretty awesome. You can evolve just like the audience." The fat man took out a braised chicken leg and bit it, then shook his head. "How about it? Is it fun outside?" "That's it? Of course it's not as exciting as yours. Come on, I know you have high standards. You don't like these vulgar fans, so I don't want to call you." She is quite pitiful. She hasn't received a single business in 3 days. I think everyone is quite. It's not easy, it's a big help if you can. You rely on your brothers at home and you rely on your friends when you go out, right? Subai opened the window to let the smell in the room dissipate as much as possible. "Fat man, I think you should give me a separate room." "I don't know, you think we are in the seafood business?" "Okay, I'll open it for you after dinner." The fat man sat down by the bed, opened the beer bottle cap, and looked at the back of the bottle cap. Now there are no winning beer caps. When I was a kid, I remember that there would always be another bottle. By the way, Dabai, don't you want to eat?" "You can eat, I'm not very hungry." People are made of iron. If you don't eat one meal, you will feel hungry. Even if you lose your appetite, you have to eat. I'm hungry anyway. 1 drop of semen and 3 drops of blood, so I have to replenish it. It almost squeezed me to pieces just now." Boom. In an instant, there was a violent explosion not far ahead, and a huge fireball shot into the sky, illuminating the night like daylight. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 408. The chicken drumsticks and beer in the fat man's hands fell down and were thrown on the carpet. His hands couldn't help but squeeze them again, looking a little unbelievable. "Is this a war?" Fatty muttered. "The United States is at war with us." "It's not like that." Subai shook his head. "Let's go and see what happened." "Wait a minute, let me get dressed." The fat man quickly went over and put his clothes on. The two of them didn't take the elevator down to the main entrance, but jumped directly from the high-rise window. The streets were in a mess. The windows on many nearby buildings were shattered. The road was littered with broken glass. There were also some people sitting on the roadside wailing. They had more or less broken glass on their bodies. Scars from the glass. With a thought in Subai's mind, the windbreaker appeared and wrapped around him. His feet were only 10 centimeters off the ground. He moved forward quickly in a ghost way. Fatty's body skills were also good and he could keep up with Subai. The two people were very fast, and because it was night, there were no people on the road, and the area where the explosion occurred was not a residential area, so there was no panic situation. The fire was still burning, and as the distance got closer, the air seemed to be dyed with a layer of scorching heat. "Damn, what does this smell like?" the fat man sniffed. "It doesn't smell like gunpowder smoke. Damn it, isn't it the imperialists who dropped poison gas bombs on us?" "Are gas bombs so powerful?" Subai frowned. "Over there, if I remember correctly, it should be the warehouse area. Someone smuggled arms and the gangs fought over the arms and then detonated the bomb," Fatty guessed. "You've watched too many Hong Kong dramas. There is a wall in front, and the fire area is basically within that area. There are actually many residential apartment buildings outside, but they were only affected by the shock waves of the explosion. After all, the warehouse area is still some distance away from the residential area, and there is no fire. The trend of spreading is, after all, this is not a forest fire, and urban planning and design also have their own rules." He climbed onto the wall, and just diagonally below, a ball of fire suddenly rose up and hit Subai's face directly. Xuanbai quickly crossed his hands, and a layer of ice appeared on his body, blocking the flames. "Go down." The fat man also jumped over, because there was no obstruction from the tall wall, and the sea of fire in front of him was really unobstructed. "Damn, this is really spectacular," Fatty actually exclaimed. Dabai, even in the story world, we rarely see such a spectacular fire." The warehouse area was very large, and at this time, almost the entire area was turned into a sea of flames. However, the fire seemed to have begun to slow down due to the violent explosion at the beginning. In front of Subai and Fatty, there were several gas tanks burning. These gas tanks were very large. "Babai, there's something wrong with the color of this flame. Why is it this color?" The colors of the surrounding flames are not the colors of traditional fire scenes. They are blue and green, giving people an inexplicable feeling of panic. "There should be chemical substances burning." Subai pursed his lips. "It should be an accident that caused the explosion here, and then the entire warehouse area was ignited. That can't be such an exaggeration, right? I don't believe it was the warehouse manager who accidentally dropped a cigarette butt on the ground without stepping on it, which resulted in this accident." The fat man wiped the sweat beads on his forehead. "It is obviously winter, but being in a huge fire scene seems like walking into the scorching summer. That's almost it. Let's go." Now that they have determined that it is not a war or any other special event, there is no need for the two of them to stay. They are not so busy rushing to watch the excitement, and there seems to be no one in the warehouse, which is relatively empty area, so even if the fire keeps burning, it should not cause too many casualties. The fat man nodded. "Let's go." "Damn, my shower was in vain." The fat man had just finished that kind of exercise and took a comfortable bath. As a result, he was now covered in smelly sweat, which was also mixed with the unpleasant smell that comes from burning chemicals. This kind of smell can be easily washed away. It is difficult to wash off the bath in a short time, which makes the fat man very annoyed. When the two people were about to leave, the surrounding flames suddenly shrank a lot. This made both Subai and Fatty stop subconsciously. This was not just a simple burning object that had been almost burned. The fire began to shrink, because the surrounding flames were obviously compressed. Explosions, flames, and other manifestations are actually a form of explicit communication of energy. Subai and Fatty are both experienced listeners, and their understanding and application of their respective powers have reached a very advanced level, and they are inseparable. Chizone, at this time, the surrounding flames suddenly slowed down. In the eyes of ordinary people, this was a flame that was about to burn out and was about to go out. However, in the eyes of Subai and Fatty, it was like a master gathering momentum before making a move. The two people's eyes met for a moment, and both of them showed a hint of shock. "Dabai, hurry up, damn, this is the time to explode again." The fat man jumped up immediately, and his fat body was flying extremely fast and dexterously. Subai also completely untied the restrictions of the windbreaker, floated up and left here quickly. Even listeners, even senior listeners, would be hard-pressed to survive such a super-intensity terrorist explosion. Therefore, Subai and Fatty did not dare to have any luck. They did not die in the story world but died in the end. In my own curiosity, in the real world, it would be really frustrating. The speed of Subai and Fatty reached its peak at this time, and they quickly climbed over the wall again, preparing to retreat to a safe point and retreat some distance away, or simply go back to the hotel, because the flames suddenly stagnated when they saw them. At the end, the first wave of explosions just looked like an appetizer. At this moment, Subai suddenly stopped and froze in mid-air. The fat man sensed this and immediately turned around to look at Subai. "Run, we haven't reached the safe area yet." I have to say that Fatty was quite interesting at this time. Of course, he didn't want to leave the impression of running away in front of the audience who were his friends. Subai pointed in the opposite direction. "There are several fire trucks coming over there." The fat man looked over, and sure enough, there were about 5 or 6 fire trucks coming in this direction. The lights of the fire trucks were easy to identify. It's none of our business. Dabai, run away. Damn it, don't really get killed. That would be too funny. There are so many strong winds and waves coming. Let's not capsize the boat in the gutter here. The fat man obviously has the character of a dead Taoist friend but not a poor Taoist. Of course, Subai is the same. The second wave of explosions may happen at any time. God knows how big the coverage area is. In the vast world, your own life is the most important. As for the lives of ordinary people, well, what's there to care about? Subai didn't say anything. Although there was a moment's hesitation in his eyes, he still moved quickly. At this time, he had better take care of himself first. Just like that, the two people continued to leave quickly. To ordinary people, the speed of the two people was like a speeding motorcycle driving past. Finally, the fire convoy was in front. Fatty disappeared in a flash and went straight over without even looking at the fire truck next to him. The same was true for Subai. At this time, Subai really had no interest in caring about the lives of ordinary people. It's not Lei Feng, he hasn't sacrificed himself for others to that extent. However, when Subai passed by a fire truck, he caught a person out of the corner of his eye. It was a young firefighter standing next to the fire truck holding onto the railing. He was wearing fireproof clothing and had a face. There was still a touch of childishness on his face, and fear and panic still shone in his eyes. He was obviously scared to death, but he still held onto the railing with both hands and headed towards the fire scene with the convoy. This is the third time we meet today. Oh shit. It's really the third time. The first time was on the high-speed train from Qinhuangdao to Tianjin. This young man was watching the old version of Love Apartment on his mobile phone and laughing. The second time I was walking casually on the street. The young man who had just returned from the army was checking the fire hydrants on the street with his comrades. The third time. This is the current situation. Subai knew in his heart that the second explosion was about to start. If their fire brigade continued to move forward, let alone put out the fire, they would definitely be killed directly in the fire. The terrifying temperature of the explosion and the power is not something that the firefighting suits they are wearing can withstand, and it will be unknown whether even a few pieces of the body can be found. Taking a deep breath, a ferocious look appeared on Subai's face. Damn it, he couldn't be such a virgin. How could he care about others when he couldn't take care of himself? Be sick. Subai closed his eyes and continued to move forward at a high speed. The group of fire trucks passed by Subai, one heading towards the fire scene and the other away from the fire scene. However, less than 10 seconds after passing by, Subai opened his eyes suddenly, and his eyes were full of struggle. For some reason, the hysterical scene before Lan Lin committed suicide suddenly appeared in Subai's mind, and Subai's heart was broken. At this point, it seemed like a beat had been missed. Why am I so mean now? Subai scolded himself fiercely. The fat man turned around while running, and when he saw Subai turning around and going back, he immediately shouted, Dabai, your brain is filled with water. In Fatty's sight, he saw Subai catching up with the fire truck at the front of the fire convoy at an extremely fast speed, and kicked the fire truck out of the way and across the road. The fire truck stopped immediately. At this time, a dazzling white light suddenly appeared, and a huge roar suddenly came. The fat man felt that his eyes were suddenly blinded indirectly, and his ears were also shocked and instantly deafened. The rolling air waves directly overturned the fat man's fat body, with a blazing burning. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 409. After the violent explosion, a pile of soil on the lawn suddenly moved, and then the fat man climbed out of it. Bah, bah, bah. After spitting out the mud in his mouth, the fat man wiped his face and stood up unsteadily. Now, he was still dizzy. The green belt beside the road was originally plowed by a bulldozer. Not much green can be seen. Damn, this is really enough for a pot. After standing for about a minute, the fat man's hearing and vision were completely restored to normal. He patted the dust on his hair and walked forward. Bye Max, bye Max. The fat man began to shout. According to his understanding, even if Subai was closer to the center of the explosion due to the retracement before the explosion, it would not kill Subai directly. You must know Subai's current strength and physical fitness. It can be called a pervert. He survived it and was fine except for feeling a little uncomfortable, so Subai was even less likely to have any problems. After walking some distance, Fatty saw 5 fire trucks parked on the road. The fire trucks were covered in dust and had burnt marks. However, what surprised the fat man was that these fire trucks were still parked here safely and were not overturned by the air wave. This was very strange. He had just been swept out by the entire air wave. What happened to these fire trucks? Can you still stay where you are safely? Is it possible that fire trucks are so advanced now? Are they all designed according to the standards of military armored vehicles? Suddenly, the fat man seemed to have figured out something and ran over. Sure enough, although the fire truck was dirty and stained with a layer of dried mud, the windows were not broken. This was simply impossible. When the first wave of explosions occurred, all the window glass in the nearby apartment building was shattered. How could this fire truck be spared? The firefighters in the fire truck were all lying in the car. There were also some firefighters who were holding onto the railings of the fire truck and marching with the car outside. They were lying on the ground. But Fatty could tell at a glance that these firefighters, they were all just knocked unconscious and were not in danger of life. At most, they might be found to have some minor concussions, but their original fate should have been to be wiped out in ashes in the second explosion. It would be difficult to even find their bodies. Peace. Looking at this, Fatty's heart became heavier and heavier, because these people were not dead, these people were fine, and it was definitely not an accident and the blessing of the goddess of luck. Damn it, Dabai, are you crazy? The fat man started to run quickly and rushed forward. Finally, in front of the first fire truck, he saw Subai. This scene made Fatty stunned. At this time, most of the flesh and blood on Subai's body had almost disappeared. The whole person was kneeling there like a specimen, with his hands still open. The bones were exposed in many places, and the aura on his body was very weak. The fat man quickly took out an elixir from his pocket, crushed it and sprinkled it on Subai's wound. At this time, there was no need to take it orally, just sprinkle it directly on the wound and let it blend into the blood. It seemed that the effect of the medicine was very strong. Subai shuddered and fell to the ground. The fat man pursed his lips, hugged Subai directly, and left here while cursing, because there were waves of sirens nearby. Obviously, after the explosion, all attention and strength began to rush quickly toward here. On the hotel bed, Subai licked his chapped lips. Water, water. I'm coming. The fat man's voice sounded next to him. He brought a glass of water and gave it to Subai slowly. After drinking the water, Subai finally regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he saw a familiar scene. He was still in that hotel. But there are still constant tingling sensations in the body. Damn it, you've been unconscious for a whole day and a night, wasting so much of my pills. The fat man muttered as he lifted Subai's quilt, and saw that the trauma on Subai's body had almost recovered, and there was no longer the terrible scene of exposed bones. On the one hand, the fat man himself gave Subai a lot of medicine, and he himself some of the treasures were exchanged for story points from the WeChat store. On the other hand, or the most important aspect was Subai's own abnormal physical fitness, which allowed him to survive. I'll pass on some story points to you later, Subai said. It's too foreign to say this. The fat man shook his head. He didn't really care about the story point, but he was a little confused. Did you have a short circuit in your brain before? You can bear the power of the explosion in an area by yourself. Do you know that if the explosion is a little stronger, you will be completely wiped out? Yes, you are a vampire, but being a vampire does not mean immortality. You are still far away from immortality. Damn it, Subai, the monk is right, stay with you less when I have nothing to do. If I stay with you, fat man, I will lose 20 or 30 years of my life. Yes, my brain is short-circuited, Subai said. Seeing Subai's attitude, the fat man didn't bother to say anything else. Forget it, I've booked a flight for tomorrow. If you rest for another day, your strength and internal injuries won't recover, but at least you can walk after all. We came out together. I will be responsible for sending you back to Shanghai. Next time, even if you give me 10,000 story points, fatty, I will never go out with you. Subai smiled, supported the bed with one hand, exerted his strength, and slowly sat up against the bed. Has the cause of the explosion been investigated clearly? Subai asked. The fat man smiled and said, no, it is said that some chemicals were illegally stored in the warehouse, which accidentally caused the explosion. Now the mainstream media on the internet have begun to praise the firefighters who have the courage to sacrifice. It is estimated that in a while elementary school students have to write about this case study, and the title is The Heroic Fireman Uncle. That's what happens in China, so let's set the tone first. Are many firefighters dead? Subai asked. It is estimated that there are quite a few. After the first explosion, most of the nearby firefighters rushed directly to the fire scene to prepare to put out the fire. The group of firefighters you stopped was fine. The rest really survived. Now in the news it is said that there are 20 or 30 people who are temporarily disconnected, but I think it is far more than that. It is estimated that there will be more after a while. Every time I encounter this, it is like constipation. I cover the lid hard. How many can be opened depends solely on luck. The fat man changed his subject. Hey, but I'm not qualified to say anything. The unknown hero is lying in front of me now. I really regret not taking pictures at that time. I took pictures of your miserable appearance at that time, and then sent them to various media. Have you watched Captain America? If you become popular in the future, you can be called Captain China. There was obvious dissatisfaction and complaint in the fat man's tone. I encountered a feeling. Subai looked into Fatty's eyes and said seriously, I didn't want to care about it at first, but when I passed the fire truck, I saw a person. Fatty, do you still remember the guy who laughed while watching Love Apartment on the high-speed train? That young man, the fat man obviously remembered. Yes, didn't I go for a walk after we arrived in Tianjin? I saw him again on the road, and then when the explosion occurred that night, I saw him again on the fire truck. Subai stopped when he said this. He was waiting for Fatty's reaction. He believed that with Fatty's know-it-all ability and the audience's social butterfly nature, even if he had not yet reached that level and strength, you should probably have heard of some things. There was a look of seriousness on the fat man's face, and he immediately said, Dabai, what do you mean, karma? Subai shook his head, I don't know, but if you said this was a coincidence, it would be too coincidental. So I didn't suddenly feel compassion at that time. I just felt that I met this person in 3 different places in one day. After meeting him 3 times, it seemed a little wrong to ask him to die in an explosion later. The fat man took out an apple and took a bite. There was a chewing sound in his mouth. Dabai, be careful. Not everyone can touch the cause and effect. Or are you ready to touch it? Subai's mind immediately recalled Lan Lin's hysteria before she committed suicide. Audiences at the level of Lan Lin, Yan Huiyang, and Piaolu were considered advanced audiences in the strict sense, but that powerful woman, that noble woman, still collapsed under the great fear of cause and effect, and finally committed suicide in hysteria. With this lesson in mind, Sudbai really hesitated. I don't know what the cause and effect is, but I know that many high-level listeners died inexplicably because of these two words. The fat man patted Sudbai on the shoulder. You just fused your natal weapon, and your strength, the great leap forward, has just been promoted, and you still have a long way to go on the originally solid road. Really, Dabai, we don't need to be so impatient. In fact, I also plan to start integrating my natal weapons after returning to Shanghai this time, and I will no longer choose or hesitate. Fatty was obviously envious of Sudbai's great leap in strength after fusing his natal weapon. Sudbai nodded, indicating that he understood. Okay, you lie down alone for a while, and I'll buy food. The fat man walked out of the guest room. Sudbai was lying on the bed alone. He picked up the remote control next to him and turned on the TV. It happened to be the local TV station in Tianjin. In the picture, a reporter was conducting an interview accompanied by a camera. The fire at the fire scene had been basically controlled, and search and rescue operations and operations to extinguish hidden dangers were still going on. The reporter stood behind a firefighter at work. Comrade, we are reporters from Tianjin TV. Can you accept our interview now? The firefighter on the TV turned around. His face was dark from fire and smoke, but it could be seen that he was very young. Sorry, I don't have time. The young firefighter ignored the reporter and continued busy with his work. The reporter was a little embarrassed, but he immediately came to his senses and said, "Friends in the audience, this is the situation at the scene. Our people's soldiers and firefighters are seizing every moment to conduct search and rescue operations at the fire scene. They don't care about eating or sleeping, and they are focused on the sacred and great mission of saving people's property. At the same time, the party and the country are very concerned." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 410. The next day, Sudbai, who was barely able to move, took a plane back to Shanghai with Fatty. He took a taxi from the airport back to Lao Fang's house. After entering the house, he saw the little guy sitting on the sofa and playing with stacks of blocks. Sudbai really felt a strange feeling. A feeling of home. Jixiang was lying on the side of the sofa. Even when Sudbai came back with Fatty, he just lightly swept his tail, looking unfazed. In fact, Sudbai has always been puzzled about why Jixiang is so kind to the little guy. If at the beginning, Jixiang only likes the little guy because of his aura, as a big demon, or because of the little guy. He was also born from the belly of a great fox demon. If the demon clansmen of the same position have a good impression of each other, there is nothing wrong with that. But for a long time, Sudbai didn't believe that Jixiang, who was so cold, had insisted on being so considerate to the little guy. There was no special reason. But Jixiang said nothing and expressed nothing. Whether it was its relationship with Lychee or the blood corpse, it had no intention of saying it. It seemed that its life as a cat was very simple and pure, and it just had nothing to do and look at the picture scroll. Take care of children. Fortunately, Sudbai is also a big-tempered person. Regarding Jixiang, he has no precautions and no need to take any measures, because Sudbai knows that he may die at any time, especially what he did in Qinhuangdao, which was almost trampling the rules of horror broadcasting. The next story mission, whether I can come back alive, I don't have much confidence in my heart. If he died, would the monk, Fatty, Gyatso and the others come to help him take care of the little guy? Give it to someone else? Leave it to Sunur? Leave it to Chuzhao? Give it to an orphanage? It seems that no one takes better care of this cat. After taking a bath, the fat man was already lying on the carpet, eating popcorn and watching TV. The little guy leaned on the fat man's belly and watched TV with the fat man. The little guy did have problems with the fat man in the past, but the fat man also I spent time coaxing the little guy many times. After all, at that time, Fatty didn't know that children in this story world would really be taken out and raised as sons by Subai. Deep down in his heart, Fatty felt a little guilty for this little guy. The relationship between the two of them is really good now. "Where's Jixiang?" Subai asked. "That cat went outside to bask in the sun," the fat man said, and reached out to touch the little guy's face. A look of doting appeared on his face at this time, as he was sinister and used to pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger. "Perhaps. This is people, right? In this world, there are no heinous bad people, and no perfect good people. Even the heinous murderer may give up his seat to an old man on the bus. As long as his own interests and safety are not related, everyone wants a more comfortable life." Subai picked up a glass of water on the coffee table and took a sip. He looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows into the yard. Jixiang was lying on a cushion, basking in the sun and looking at the painting. I don't know why, but Subai's mood suddenly became heavier when he saw the painting. This painting can indeed predict the future, but there seems to be no way to change the future. He has already gone to Qinhuangdao, and it can be regarded as a successful spoiler. Lin Zhou's eyeballs were eaten by him like jelly beans, and Gong Zihai's lower body was crushed by his kick. Those people's goals were not achieved, but they were just messing up the situation crazily by themselves. Under the premise, the blue figure was pierced by the crossbow arrow and finally sank into the depths of the sea without a trace. Does this also mean that Sunu's death is something that cannot be changed? In fact, predicting the future is not a good thing, especially when you find that you have worked extremely hard but still can't change the future. People will become very negative, and the unchangeable future is related to the style and personality you have always adhered to. A kind of opposition and conflict, but also an unbearable suffering. "Dabai, what's for lunch?" the fat man asked. "By the way, Gang Gyatso sent me a WeChat message and said that he would come back to live here soon. There is no news from the monk, and I don't know what he is busy with. Or he happens to be in the story world right now. The more people there are, the more lively it will be," Subai said. "Ha ha ha," the fat man suddenly laughed. "Dabai, you said, the four of us live here, and we will all die in the story world one after another, and then the neighbors around, they originally saw that there are several men in this house. Slowly, the men disappeared one by one, and no one lived in this house. Could this also turn into an unsolved case or a supernatural incident? Just call it, Lao Fang's house's supernatural incident, or Lao Fang's house's faceless man incident, tisk tisk, which one sounds more exciting?" "You're bored enough." Subai didn't want to pay attention to the fat man talking nonsense. "I'll order takeout, I'm too lazy to cook now." "Okay, just order it and I'll continue watching my TV." Subai took out his mobile phone and was about to order takeout. Suddenly, he frowned and immediately grabbed his chest with his left hand. He knelt down from the sofa and fell to the ground, paralyzed in pain. The sound was loud because Subai basically fell down without any hindrance. The little guy immediately crawled towards Subai anxiously, with tears shining in his eyes. "Daddy, Daddy." Fatty immediately got up and came to Subai's side. Seeing Subai's familiar painful look, he suddenly felt a little thirsty. As a senior listener, Fatty naturally knew what this look meant. "This is a horror broadcast for you. I was notified of the mission, but usually it was just a burst of angina pectoris. The pain was certainly painful, but it was not unbearable. It was just that Subai was like this. Even if his body had just suffered a severe injury and was still not healed, he would not break into a cold sweat from the pain. DC should have turned pale. This means that in the next story world, the horror broadcast is full of malice towards Subai. The fat man knew that no amount of comfort, massage, or any panacea could relieve Subai's pain at this time. Fortunately, although the pain of this mission notice was obviously increased, it only lasted for a short while. Sudbai's brows slowly relaxed, and his whole body looked like he had just crawled out of a water tank, and his whole body was wet with cold sweat. He got up with some difficulty and sat on the blanket. The little guy lay on Sudbai's lap and looked at Sudbai worriedly. Sudbai reached out and touched the little guy's head. "Good boy, go play. Dad is fine." The little guy didn't listen and shook his head, holding Sudbai's legs tightly with his two chubby little hands. Sudbai was a little helpless. Of course, he was also moved a lot. Maybe his relationship with others was intertwined with too many interests. Even his relationship with his parents didn't look like what he thought before. It's so pure, but this little guy's concern for himself is pure and without any impurities. The fat man squatted down next to Sudbai and motioned to Sudbai to take out his phone and take a look. Sudbai nodded, picked up the mobile phone he had just thrown away when he fell off the sofa, and clicked on WeChat. A preview message from the WeChat public account Kongview66 had been sent. Taking a deep breath, Sudbai was really looking forward to what his next story world would be like, because the next story world might very well be his last. Click on the message section. What appears is a picture. The main color of the picture is black. In the middle is a table. On the table is an identity card with the words judge written on it. At the same time, this is a close-up, but it can be seen from other positions in the picture. In the picture, there are 12 identical tables, which also means that there are 12 presiding judges in total. Among this circle of tables, there is a gallows. On the gallows, there are 3 people standing there. The 3 people have their heads covered and their true faces cannot be seen. But as long as they take a small step forward, their necks will, after being strangled by the rope, the plank below will fall down and the 3 people will be hanged. The whole picture has a dark feel, and at the same time, just looking at this picture can already give people a great psychological pressure. Below this picture, there are 3 words. Judgment Day. Fatty looked at the news and said with some helplessness, the number of listeners who did not participate in the story world, the time and date of entering the story world, and the pain of mission notifications that are stronger than before, this horror broadcast is it's very unfriendly. If it's friendly, then it's really a ghost. Sudbai's tone was quite calm. He had seen many strong winds and waves, so his calm courage would naturally not be missing. Then, Sudbai pointed at the 3 masked men standing on the gallows in the picture and said, "Fat man, one of these 3 people should be me." The fat man nodded, "We're pretty much the same, but I'm really curious about who the other 2 people are. Could it be a coincidence that this time, the terror broadcast was just about to punish 3 people, so the 3 of you specially designed this story world? So do the 12 judgment tables outside also mean that there will be 12 audiences specifically responsible for judging you? It's possible that in the next story world, I will be the prey, and those 12 listeners will be the hunters." Sudbai showed a sarcastic smile on his lips. "Honestly, Fatty, I'm really looking forward to meeting the other 2 people. Let's face it, listeners who have the courage to trample on the rules of horror broadcasting are really rare." Seeing that Sudbai was in a good mood, the fat man deliberately joked, "Don't put too much gold on yourself. Rare is a compliment. From the perspective of the horror broadcast, the 3 of you are like rat excrement in a pot of porridge, and there are still 3 of them." Sudbai threw the phone on the sofa. "Let's see, who will be the hunter and who will be the prey in the end, we still don't know." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 411. At nightfall, Sudbai poured himself a glass of orange juice and sat alone on a wicker chair in the yard. The yard of Lao Fang's house is actually not big, but at least it is much bigger than the balcony of an apartment in the city. After all, it is a building built by his own family, so it looks much spacious everywhere. Lying here, you can see the stars all over the sky. Putting the phone on one side, Sudbai put his hands under his head and looked at the sky above his head. The whole person seemed very quiet. The little guy has gone to sleep, accompanied by Jixiang, and the fat man has also rested. However, Subai couldn't sleep, not because he was worried about the story world that he didn't know when it would come. On the contrary, after being depressed when the mission was announced at the beginning, a trace of expectation emerged deep in Subai's heart. I'm so looking forward to it. In the next story world, what means will the horror broadcast use to judge itself? Yes, Qin Yang had suggested that Fatty go to enlighten Subai, but Fatty just couldn't find any opportunity to speak, because he didn't see what Subai needed to enlighten. Subai was simply calmer than himself, as if he was Fatty. Want to be punished instead of him like Subai. In fact, in Subai's heart, the more dangerous the story world is, the more narrowly escaped the story world is, the more exciting, the more fun, and the more worthy of his full attention. It's like playing a game, but there is only one game currency, which means you can only play it once, and if you lose, you won't even be able to save your life. But it is precisely because of this that even if it is a simple game, Tetris can also make people feel extremely nervous and exciting. This is the feeling of the game. This is Subai's pursuit and desire. Just like every time he killed someone in the killing club before, he actually had the excitement of gambling his own future and destiny, because once the matter was exposed, it would mean that 4 young people with extremely deep family backgrounds would encounter a terrible situation. A destruction crisis. This is not a barefoot person who is not afraid of wearing shoes, nor is it a cynical revenge of ordinary people against society. It is precisely because they have a background and status that most people in society envy, so they do illegal killings under these pressures. It can bring an indescribable excitement even more. Winter nights were less lively and more solemn than in summer. Subai just stared at the stars for 2 hours. When he felt a little tired, he turned his head slightly and closed his eyes. It's time to take a break. Boom. It seemed that he had just closed his eyes and just barely entered the sleep state. Immediately, the world spun around and Subai fell face down. Fortunately, whether he was sleeping or eating, Subai's reflex instinct was still there, and he quickly held up his hands. He touched the ground, tapped his palm lightly, and stood up straight. It only takes half a day from when the mission notification is released to when we enter the story world. Subai pursed his lips. From all these signs, it can be seen that the punishment of the horror broadcast in the story world this time is really very heavy. Fortunately, Subai will not be directly terrorized like the blood corpse. The radio pulled him into the world of the story and crushed him to death without saying a word. After all, compared to the feat of blood corpses slaughtering the entire audience in Shaanxi, Subai was not qualified. It was also dark here, but the surrounding environment was no longer the backyard of Lao Fang's house, but a virgin forest. Towering trees, hot and humid air, and squirming snakes, insects, rats, and ants all around. In short, this environment is very uncomfortable. There is no task prompt or any label, just leaving you here alone. Subai raised his head and looked at the top of his head. Sure enough, the problem was here. There was no moon or stars above his head, and the entire sky seemed to be covered with a layer of black cloth. A green snake slowly slipped down from the cover of leaves, aiming at Subai's neck and about to bite him. Who knew that Subai directly stretched out his hand to catch the snake that dared to add insult to injury, and gently touched it with his thumb. With a slight dig, a snake gall with a salty smell was pulled out. Putting the snake gall into his mouth, it was a bit bitter, but the smell of blood lingering between his teeth made Subai's excitement more intense. Subai wiped his hand covered with snake blood on the tree trunk and smiled. But please, don't let me down too much. As soon as he finished speaking, Subai turned around suddenly, and a military thorn was already in front of Subai, poking directly at Subai's face. Subai raised his left hand, and a hellfire shotgun appeared in his hand. At this time, it was too late to shoot, so he blocked it with the barrel of the gun. Boom. The sound of the impact of the soldiers and iron was very harsh, and Subai advanced forward without retreating, his whole body actively pounced forward like a cheetah. Even though the opponent's attack failed, he did not retreat, but took the initiative to attack again just like Subai. However, the moment the two figures came into contact, Subai's body turned into blood mist and penetrated directly through it. But the other party's body was similar, and his body turned into a shadow. After about a short breath, the blood mist instantly condensed into Subai's figure. He turned around, held both guns in his hands, and pulled the trigger. Everything is done in one go. The opponent's shadow quickly dissipated, revealing his figure. At the same time, he opened his bow and nocked an arrow, and a smooth dark green arrow shot out. Boom! A violent explosion sounded, and a big hole was opened in the surrounding ground. Some nearby objects were also uprooted. Subai, who was deep in the center of the explosion, and the person opposite resisted the backlash of blood flow, and once again took the initiative to rush towards each other. It was just a face-to-face fight between two people. Both sides knew clearly that the other party was a model who had experienced hundreds of battles like themselves. Their fighting instincts and fighting arts had reached a state of integration into instincts. The two people who were close again did not shoot arrows or pull the trigger again, because both sides knew that it would be difficult to kill the opponent in this way in close combat, and it would also actively expose the gap for the opponent to capture. Bloodlines appeared all over Subai's body. The moment he got close to him, his strength was raised to another level. Even the air around him seemed to be stagnant. The ability of the bloodline is equivalent to a secret method that stimulates the body's potential with extremely low side effects. It can increase Subai's strength and speed in a very short time. Especially in hand-to-hand combat, a sudden burst of power can often determine the entire outcome. The trend of the matchup. However, what surprised Subai was that the other party had no intention of confronting him head-on. The other party's body suddenly became very soft, and he climbed up Subai's body like a boneless snake. At this moment, Subai also smelled a faint fragrance. This was equivalent to making Subai punch the cotton with a punch, and black shadows were running around on him. If the opponent hadn't used weapons such as bows and arrows and spurs before, Subai almost thought he had encountered this person. The local monster in the story world. Subai subconsciously wanted to break free and let the enemy hang on him. It was definitely not a very pleasant thing. However, the other party suddenly exerted force at this time, and Subai's neck and other joints all over his body were hit hard at the same time. Subai let out a muffled groan and knelt down immediately. Then, the other party's body began to tighten, as if the rope began to strangle Subai tightly, making it very difficult to even breathe. Is this judo? Windbreaker? As his mind moved, the windbreaker immediately appeared on Subai's body, helping Subai to remove less than half of the external force. Subai stood up again without giving the opponent a chance to lock him directly. At the same time, he switched to zombie in this state, his whole body became extremely stiff. While he lost his speed, he no longer had the weaknesses that existed in certain joints of normal people. The opponent didn't seem to expect that Subai had so many ways to break the situation, and seemed a little flustered. However, the opponent was also a decisive person. If he failed to succeed, he would immediately retreat and leave the battle to wait for the next opportunity to fight. However, Subai was not like that. A kind of person who likes to let the tiger return to the mountains. The surrounding trees and grass were covered with frost in an instant, and the temperature also dropped suddenly. This was the burst of cold poison on Subai's body. The purpose was not to kill, but to slow down the opponent. Then Subai stretched out his hands to push away the opponent who had just left. The black shadow that broke away from his body hugged him, and then slammed his whole body downwards. Boom! There was a loud noise, and Subai and the other party smashed a human-shaped hole on the ground with a depth of about 5 meters. However, the other party's body began to get hotter and hotter, so hot that even Sudbai felt a little scared. As if he was about to explode. Sudbai immediately let go and jumped onto the ground. In an instant, the ground under Sudbai's feet began to melt. Sudbai saw that the original black shadow turned into a halo of light at this time, directly covering it. This hot the temperature is like an angry phoenix. The other party didn't intend to let the tiger go. From the first time the two met, they directly put a death label on each other's forehead. Sudbai's eyes narrowed, and a shadow tied to a cross appeared behind him. A cold and strange aura came from Sudbai's body, and then the two smashed together again. Bang! 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 All around, lights are on. On the outskirts of the primeval forest, a circular glass window appeared. Behind the glass window, 12 trial tables were arranged in sequence. Behind each trial table, there was a person standing. They all seemed to be looking inside curiously. At this moment, Sudbai and that person both stopped their hands at the same time. On the ground. Sudbai's arms were still tightly holding the opponent's waist, and his legs were holding the opponent's neck. The other person was doing the same trick, both of them used their bodies to strangle the other person. However, only at this moment did Sudbai clearly see the true face of the person opposite her. She turned out to be a woman. The position of his face at this time was facing the most private part between the woman's legs. Similarly, the position of the woman's face was also facing the third leg between Sudbai's legs. Call. Sudbai blew a breath. Wet. Hot. It has a salty smell like snake gall. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 412. Sudbai let go of the woman and stood up together. The woman was wearing a skirt, which looked like pajamas. Since he was here with her, it meant that she was the same as him and should be one of the 3 people who were hanged with their heads covered. The hunters all stood there and watched. Between the prey, there was no need to fight each other first. It would be good to save some energy to resist the hunter, even if it even tears off a piece of meat from the hunter. However, what surprised Xuanbai was that even the audience actually carried military thorns, bows, and arrows with them when they slept. Sudbai's Hellfire shotgun was his natal weapon, but for this woman, one of her military spurs and bow and arrow was definitely not her natal weapon, or maybe even both. The woman let out a breath. In the encounter with Sudbai just now, she did not fall behind, which is enough to prove her strength. At this time, her face was also very calm, and she did not have the fear of falling into prey. She glanced at Sudbai, with a hint of scrutiny in her eyes. Sudbai said his name. At this time, the wisest way is not to hug each other for warmth, but to at least straighten out the relationship and avoid stabbing each other in the back. Sudbai likes to enjoy the excitement of games, but it doesn't mean that Sudbai is single-minded. Want to die? Ni Lan, the other party, also said his name. This is a manifestation of the exchange of attitudes between the two parties, and it can also be regarded as a tacit understanding. It seems that this is a closed space similar to the one in the Hunger Games. It is a giant building with an openable and closable roof above our heads similar to the bird's nest in the background, and there are auditoriums all around. Sudbai looked around. At this time, the famous saying came to his mind. When you watch the scenery on the bridge, the people watching the scenery are watching you upstairs. As a judge, Sudbai doesn't know that those people are watching through the glass. What kind of state of mind do you have when waiting for someone? But by looking at their body movements, you can deduce their eagerness to try. Obviously, I should be a generous reward to them. Horror radio is good at creating this kind of atmosphere, and it also has unique preferences. Watching listeners kill each other seems to be one of its hobbies, because sometimes, horror radio does a lot of things to sow discord. We have one more person. Nilan did not pursue Subai's intention to be frivolous towards him before. On the one hand, everyone was actually quite relaxed. On the other hand, it was very retarded to care about this at this time. Things. Subai shrugged, "You are the first prison inmate I have ever met." Just when the two of them finished speaking, a stream of light appeared in the sky. Then, a harsh and sonorous sound came. A figure, carrying a knife, fell from a height, and the blade struck the ring glass hard. The judges behind the glass stepped back one after another, seemingly shocked. However, the glass was still motionless. This sword indeed carried a very powerful momentum and terrible power, but it still could not do anything to this kind of glass. It's useless. Ian's mouth showed a hint of sarcasm. She felt that since the horror broadcast arranged this scene, how could you let the three of you in and let you break the glass and rush out? This doesn't fit the aesthetic of horror broadcasting at all. Subai glanced at Nilan and said, "I was only looking at your lower body just now, but now I realize that your breasts are also quite big." Ian's eyes narrowed slightly. Of course she knew what Subai meant by these words. She was saying that she was big-breasted and brainless. This knife is obviously not to try to split this layer of glass, but to test the strength of the judges behind the glass. Most of them backed away in fear. What does this mean? It means that their strength is actually meager. In front of that knife, they have no confidence at all. This news and this result are already obvious. If those so-called judges don't even count a senior audience, how can they carry out our trial? Is it a vote? Whoever gets more votes will die. Subai shook his head, "How stupid." The military thorn in Nian's hand was lifted up and placed across Subai's neck. Subai did not move and just stood there, as if he was sure that Nilan would not really kill him. However, Subai's attitude only irritated Nilan even more. "Don't think that I don't dare to kill you, don't think that I will really take care of the overall situation from beginning to end," Nilan threatened. "I hate people talking to me in this tone. I have hated it since I was a child." He. Subai smiled and said. Then he said, "Then you must have had poor academic performance since childhood. There are only 3 of us, and the 12 people sit behind the table and slowly vote to decide our life and death. Will the radio use this boring routine? As for what mode the broadcast will use to carry out this kind of trial where the 2 sides are unequal in strength, I don't know, but it should be quite interesting. This is the story world, and every bad taste of the broadcast can be easily transformed into a story here. Reality. And, last but not least, you have 10 seconds to remove the military thorn from my neck, otherwise I swear, even if I completely lose my life in this story world, I will kill you at all costs first." Even when he was threatening people, Subai's tone was still calm. Joke. Regardless of the overall situation. Willful and reckless. Turn over the table. Damn, this is my signature style, okay. How dare you threaten me with this? Believe it or not, I really don't care and will completely hurt each other with you. The so-called fear of being stunned or life-threatening. Among the entire audience circle, Subai can be said to be the most unique one. Even people like monks and fat men have a headache with Subai because of Subai's words. He is not a threat at all, he is just being himself, doing what he likes to do the most, and doing what he feels is natural. Nian's hand suddenly trembled involuntarily, and she silently took back the military thorn. For some reason, Nilan, who had planned to threaten Subai, found that she was successfully threatened by Subai instead, because she could feel, the other party seems to really do what he says. In the dense forest ahead, the guy who just went to chop the glass with a knife came over. The guy was more thorough. Nilan was only wearing pajamas, but this guy didn't even have a pair of underwear on him. He was completely naked, and his toned muscles were fully displayed. Similar to Tarzan. However, on that man's back was a very simple broadsword. In Sudbai's mind, the last audience member who used a knife in his memory was Gyatso. That very ordinary hatchet seemed to have endless power in Gyatso's hands. Perhaps, this also means that both of them have a high level of understanding of knives, and they no longer care about the appearance of the weapon. Hey, I'm sorry, I'm used to falling asleep. Even if there was a woman here, he didn't feel unnatural at all. Then, the man's eyes focused on Sudbai and said with a smile, "Brother, you haven't been getting ready since you received the mission notice. Do you need to be so nervous?" The other party saw that Sudbai was wearing a brand new windbreaker without even a single wrinkle, so he thought so. Little did he know that this windbreaker was actually a protective weapon for Sudbai. A little nervous, Sudbai said. "Don't be afraid, my brother is here." The man patted his chest. "You will definitely die in front of me. By the way, my name is Sudong, what about you? Since we are grasshoppers on a rope, we have to keep each other connected. Lan. Sudbai. Okay, I guess it's almost time now. The main show will start soon. There are no living people in this forest, but there are a lot of snakes, insects, rats, and ants. I'm going to get some game. Let's have a bonfire supper first. I feel like we can't wait. We've finished eating and it's almost time to start." Sudong is about 30 years old and gives people a very cheerful feeling, but how can he be so superficial when he thinks of slashing at the guy from the beginning to test the reactions of the judges? On the other hand, the woman named Lan made Sudbai think that she might be a weirdo, not very smart. But judging from the fight between the two of them just now, this woman was at least strong in terms of strength. It's not simple either. Besides, they were all sent here because they violated the rules of terrorist broadcasting. Who could be the bad guy? I'm not hungry. Lan sat cross-legged, put away the military spurs, put the bow and arrow on her knees, and began to adjust her breath. Her fighting style was not the fierce type. She had fought head-on with Sudbai for several rounds before, and her energy and blood were still weak now. There is no peace. Sudbai leaned his back against a big tree and shook his head. I'm not hungry either. Brother, just prepare your own portion. It really ruins the atmosphere. Sudong looked at the two people helplessly. Okay, I'll take a pee first, and I'll look for game later. Immediately afterwards, Sudong carelessly faced the glass on that side, held his own faucet with both hands, scratched the skin, coughed, and started to pour water. The sound of water rushing. It's very intense and very ups and downs. Sudbai, right, brother, do you know how to interpret my urine soaking if it is put on the middle school Chinese language test paper? Sudong had a lot of water, and he even shook his faucet deliberately. You say it, I'll listen. Sudbai supported him. Sudong laughed loudly, obviously very satisfied with Sudbai's answer to his words. This urine reflects the contempt and fearlessness of us oppressed and exploited listeners in the face of powerful imperialist broadcasts. Peed out the courage that belongs to us listeners. Pissing out the glorious future of our listeners. P opened a new chapter. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 413. Sudong was peeing wantonly, as if he was doing something groundbreaking, and he was humming a little tune. He was in a good mood. His appearance made Sudbai unconsciously think of Fatty, and he didn't know whether Sudong and Fatty were together. We know each other, but the two people's personalities are quite similar. However, based on Sudbai's understanding of Fatty, it is estimated that Fatty would not be able to do such a behavior of being naked and arrogant in front of others. Lan didn't ask, even though she was a woman, there were many dirtier and more obscene things in the audience circle than this. This kind of thing was really not worth mentioning. Sudbai continued to lean against the big tree, his eyes wandering a little. In an instant, Subai frowned. He saw that the ground in front of him suddenly seemed to be stretched. Sure enough, what was supposed to come has come. It's like a fire is burning in front of you, your vision in front of you is distorted, your sense of distance begins to lose, your sense of space begins to become unbalanced, and what you see with your eyes may no longer be true. Space folds. Subai was naturally familiar with this. There were also such things in deep-sea caves, but the structure in the deep sea obviously looked more advanced. The current folding of space could be distinguished with the naked eye, and it seemed a bit direct and deliberate. But when I think about this being a story world, and when I think about the three of them now being guilty, it is actually a very natural thing for the horror broadcast to be so simple and crude to the three of them. The construction of the story world itself is he used the cannon to burn the three of himself. For a time, the surrounding space began to distort and dislocate on an individual basis. At this time, Su Dong also realized that something had started to happen, but men, especially when they release water, can they stop just by saying stop? Moreover, Su Dong is also an old man. With his ears and eyes in all directions, he feels that there is still some buffering time. At least it shouldn't be a problem for him to finish the peeing comfortably. Unexpectedly, the space 1 meter away in front of Su Dong was directly displaced, and the urine that was originally urinated downward suddenly fell from the top of his head. Your grandma's. Su Dong cursed and quickly moved out of the way. He thought he could avoid his own urine. But when he moved, the water pipe below him naturally swayed, and the urine also changed at the same time. He changed the direction and it still rained on his head. The whole scene makes people laugh. Su Dong turned back to look at Subai and Ni Lan, who were getting farther and farther away from him, and saw that both of them were looking at him with smiles on their lips. It was obvious that the embarrassing scene he had just seen was caught in their eyes. Fortunately, Su Dong's character and thickness of skin are really comparable to those of Fatty, and he immediately said, "This is called child urine protection." Ni Lan stopped laughing, because the distance between the three of them was stretched out by nearly a kilometer by this kind of space folding, which was equivalent to forcefully separating the three of them and setting up three arenas that did not interfere with each other. The stage is set up, and the three leading actors are in their places. Now, it's time to get down to business. He held the bow and arrow in his hand, and a strand of hair fell from the corner of his mouth. Ni Lan concentrated his energy, and the arrow in his hand was ready to shoot out at any time. Until now, Subai still didn't see what Nian's natural weapon was. What is it? If this woman did not use her natural weapon when she just fought with him, it can only mean that this woman is not as stupid as she showed before. The person who knows how to hide his or her trump card is the most ambitious and thoughtful person, because she wants to win and be the final winner. Subai put his hands in the pockets of his windbreaker, appearing unhurried. His eyes slowly closed, but his whole body was like a tight rubber band, ready to react at any time. However, Subai's deep down, he was not as calm as he seemed. The layout and foreshadowing were already grand. Subai sincerely hoped for the main drama that would follow, but he must not let himself down. About half a minute later, a door appeared in front of the three people. The door was black, and the frame and inside were all black. Ni Lan immediately shot out an arrow without hesitation. The arrow penetrated the door and shot out. The door was not damaged at all. Unilateral transmission. Subai thought in his heart. The door cannot be destroyed or used. To be precise, it cannot be used by yourself or others. At this moment, a figure appeared in the door. To be precise, there were three figures in each of the three doors. A woman came out of Su Dong's door, and a woman came out of Nian's door. On Subai's side, the old man appeared, a young man about 18 or 19 years old. The clothes of these three people are all modern. Obviously, they are not natives of this story world. Looking around outside the glass walls, The 12 trial tables are still in place, motionless, but the figures behind the glass are there were only 9 left. These 3 who appeared in front of Subai, Lan, and Sudong in turn should be the 3 judges. When the young man in front of Subai walked out of the door and stood in front of Subai, he didn't dare to look directly into Subai's eyes. Subai's consciousness was almost unscrupulous in exploring the other person's body, and the results of the exploration were observed with himself. The feeling is basically the same. This is a very weak audience. A guy who doesn't even have the courage to face himself, is here to be his judge? Want to kill yourself? And he appeared in front of him so suddenly. At this moment, Subai felt a little ridiculous. What exactly is a horror broadcast going to do? Ian's temperament is the most direct, and her patience seems to be very lacking. The previous arrow was to test the door in front of her, but this time the arrow was shot directly at the person in front of her. The old man panicked and retreated subconsciously, but how could he be faster than the arrow? But the next moment, the aura on the old man's body suddenly increased sharply. The old man was originally wearing a green dragon pendant, jade pendant on his chest. This jade pendant is not a magic weapon. At best, it has been warmed for a long time. Wearing it on the body can have a little effect. It has the function of nourishing the mind, but at this time, this jade pendant was directly promoted to a very good-looking magic weapon, and it began to automatically protect the master. A green dragon totem appeared in front of the old man. Ian's arrow exploded when it hit the totem and turned into a cloud of dust. Ian's eyes narrowed and she looked up to the sky. Is this your method of trial? Send some garbage over, and then you take the initiative to increase the strength of these garbage, and even the things on these garbage can be directly promoted into magic weapons, and let us die in the hands of these garbage? This is punishment, it is also humiliation, and it is a demonstration that comes from terrorist broadcasts. Your reinforcements all come from WeChat exchanges. In fact, to be more precise, they all come from broadcasts. Broadcasting is to fully utilize your abilities. Present it, let your power be concretely displayed in front of everyone. Turning stone into gold and turning a deer into a horse are actually not enough to describe the scene that just happened. Lan was the first to take action, while Subai and Sudong were completely paying attention to the situation on Ian's side. Sometimes, it would be nice to have such an impulsive woman in his team. At least he could take the initiative to go there. Explore the way. The woman in front of Sudong had an ordinary appearance and ordinary clothes. When she appeared here, she seemed very restrained, and there was a constant look of struggle in her eyes. Obviously, she herself was a little hesitant. Don't panic, brother, I am a friend of women of all ages, old, middle-aged and young. If I don't kill you, you won't hit me. How about we just sit here quietly and watch the good show in the 2 places over there? When Sudong spoke, a magic sound that could not be observed with the naked eye was released. This was to put the magic sound into the woman's brain to hypnotize her. However, the woman suddenly covered her head in pain, and Sudong swayed. He reached out and touched his nose, and a wisp of nosebleed flowed out. Just now, when his magic sound was about to penetrate into the other party's sea of consciousness, the other party's spiritual level and soul level were suddenly lifted a lot, and even became not inferior to Sudong himself. Sudong, even because of Ian's previous I was mentally prepared for this scene, but I still suffered a loss. My sea of consciousness suffered a backlash, my nosebleed, and my sea of consciousness was shaken for a while, which was very uncomfortable. Subai still put his hands in the pockets of his windbreaker and looked at the young man in front of him calmly. It seemed that 2 other changes had given the man a sense of confidence. He subconsciously began to muster the strength in himself. The skin instantly turned dark red at this moment, and the whole person's aura suddenly became gloomy. This is Rakshasa. Even in the Eastern circles, there are very few people who would choose this kind of enhancement. Subai doesn't know much about Rakshasa enhancement, but it seems that the other party should have strong attainments in physical strength and spell use, which can be regarded as an enhanced attribute of magic and martial arts. However, just after the young man revealed his Rakshasa state, a silver horn suddenly grew on his forehead, pale golden runes appeared on his body, a ring appeared on his left hand, and a ring appeared on his right hand. A dark silver harpoon appeared, and his aura increased tenfold almost instantly. He. Subai actually laughed out loud. Not so partial. This is like a new player, but the system directly increases all the attribute points for him, and also puts on a set of magical equipment. How to play this? The old man in front of Nilan began to exude a dirty and evil aura. His body began to become rigid, his skin turned green, and two fangs appeared on both sides of his mouth. Seeing this scene, Subai shouted directly to Nilan. Hey, can we change? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 414. Of course, it is impossible to change. Horror broadcast is good at the game of cat and mouse. What it pursues is the fun of the story. It likes to do it step by step, bit by bit, step by step. It must be arranged in the world of this story. Everything that is good is shown in the fullest way possible. Similarly, whether it is Subai, Nilan, or Sudong, they are also very familiar with this rhythm. People who can trample the rules of terrorist broadcasting and suffer punishment actually mean that they themselves are already familiar with the rules of terrorist broadcasting. The rules are very familiar. There is a saying that accompanying you is like accompanying a tiger. The tiger's whiskers are hard to touch, but after staying with him for a long time, you will have some idea of the tiger's temperament. Subai knew clearly that the Rakshasa in front of him, who had been cheated by the radio to improve his strength and strengthen his equipment, was the first dish carefully cooked by the horror radio, which was regarded as an appetizer. How does the first dish taste and whether it is too hard? You can basically feel the trend below. Of course, one thing is certain, these judges can only be improved in strength and possess these equipment by such bugs in this environment. They leave this story world, no, even as long as they leave this world. The environment, their strength, and equipment will disappear directly after they appear outside the glass. The way horror radio cultivates listeners is similar to raising goo rather than livestock. It has the ability to create powerful fighters in batches, but this does not seem to be its purpose. In other words, even horror broadcasts cannot do such a thing. The incident with the blood corpse had made Subai realize that the horror broadcast was not omnipotent in the true sense. Although it seemed to be omnipotent in front of you, it could only be because you were too weak. When facing the level, terror broadcast obviously produced sluggishness, which are all kinds of performances that are impossible to appear on it. After feeling the improvement in strength and the equipment in his hand, Rakshasa man's confidence increased greatly. He stared at Subai with an evil look on his face, and a wanton smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Subai also showed a smile. He knew what the other person was thinking now, and he could also feel the other person's current mood. His strength suddenly increased sharply, and he suddenly held a high-quality magic weapon in his hand. It was like a poor and low-income person suddenly picked up a high-quality magic weapon. $100 million, just like Fan Jin won the national examination, the whole person was in a state of excitement and was a little confused. Strong strength, powerful magic weapon, but no matching state of mind. This is a deformed product, a product that promotes birth, because the real senior people, such as Subai, Fatty, and others, all have the same strength. Bit by bit, I have earned it by risking my life and my brain, not by pie in the sky pie falling from the sky. This is a veteran who has come out step by step. Difference. It's actually really big. The Rakshasa man turned his head slightly, that evil smile still hanging on his face. He raised the harpoon in his hand. The harpoon exuded a bright light, and there was a vague sight of the power of thunder and lightning flowing, majestic. The pressure was released, and the whole person's momentum was echoed by the high-quality magic weapon, almost like the yellow river that had burst its banks and was about to spurt out. Subai, on the other hand, still had his hands in his windbreaker pockets and his face remained calm. After Nilan shot the arrow, he put away the bow and arrow and slung it on his shoulder. Subai didn't know what kind of character this woman was. Although the two had a brief fight before, they also fought hard. Anxious and indifferent, but this woman obviously has a lot to hide. Of course, Subai did not reveal all his cards. It was not that Subai deliberately wanted to hide his clumsiness, but that Subai had a lot of cards due to his own special reasons. It's hard to get out in a short time. Su Dong wiped the nosebleed with the back of his hand. He originally wanted to wipe it with a tissue or at least a piece of cloth, but he entered the story world naked. The only reason to blame for this is that he is used to sleeping in bed. Of course, it can also be shown from the side that he is really generous and fat. He knows that he will be punished and targeted by terrorist broadcasts in the next story world, but he can still sleep well. In addition to the natal weapon fused in his body, that is knife, nothing else. The three people's eyes met for a moment unconsciously. Su Dong gently waved his hand while wiping his nosebleed, Nilan raised his forehead slightly, and Subai shook his head gently. The three people unconsciously showed their disdain with small movements. It's not disdain for each other, but disdain for the enemy in front of you. Next moment. Just take action. The first one to actually take action was not Nian's side, nor Su Dong's side, but Subai's side. Moreover, it was this Rakshasa man who took the first step. It seemed that because of his rapid improvement in strength, he was already thinking very eagerly in his heart. It's time to confirm and practice your own strength through a battle. I saw a sharp roar coming from the Rakshasa man's throat, and his entire body disappeared directly. The Rakshasa came and went without a trace, and he had a unique advantage in his body skills. In the next blink of an eye, Rakshasa man's harpoon appeared directly above Subai's head. Subai even kept his hands firmly in the pockets of his windbreaker. In fact, just now, Subai's feet had already been lifted a few decimeters off the ground by the power of the windbreaker, and he was holding the extremely sharp harpoon. When it fell, Subai retreated directly. The harpoon was inserted into the air and did not even touch Subai's side. The lightning power attached to the harpoon did rub against Subai's body, but the windbreaker still perfectly offset most of the damage. At this moment, Subai stretched out his leg. One kick. Kicked out very casually. Boom. It may seem like an understatement, but it actually contains Subai's absolute physical strength. You must know that since his debut, Subai has basically relied on his body to fight, and he has just integrated his natural weapons, even the wrestling strengthened military. No matter how hard you fight with your body in front of Subai, you will be crushed, not to mention that at this time, at best, he is a master of both magic and martial arts, and at worst, he is a Rakshasa strengthener who is mixed but not refined. Rakshasa man just launched a top-down attack on Subai. The harpoon was inserted into a hole, and his whole body naturally fell down from top to bottom. The position of his chest was equivalent to taking the initiative to reach Subai. Same. The Rakshasa man was kicked straight away by this kick and landed heavily on the ground. He immediately spat out a mouthful of blood, and there was a look of horror in his eyes. He really didn't expect that he could clearly feel the surging force in his body. He felt the powerful spiritual power of the magic weapon in his hand, but the opponent still just kicked him lightly and severely injured him. Subai disagreed with this. Even if the horror broadcast had improved Rakshasa man's strength, and even Rakshasa man's absolute strength at this time and the magic weapon were infinitely close to Subai's level, the real showdown was not between two listeners. Let's get together and compare the enhancement lists with each other. Wow, Your enhancement level is higher than mine, I will deduct 10 drops of blood. Wow, your magical weapon is stronger than mine. I will deduct 10 drops of blood. Wow, your bloodline is higher than mine, I will deduct 10 drops of blood. This is not a turn-based game where you cut me with a knife and I stab you with a sword. It is a combination of the strength of both parties, understanding of strength, use of strength, combat experience, character, and other countless aspects, plus a certain amount of undeterminable luck. Only then can the outcome be decided. Subai couldn't help but laugh a little in his heart. It seems that this idiot really hasn't experienced much battle test. He just sneaked up on himself and released his murderous intention so obviously. It was like a beautiful woman holding a lantern in the dark night. It's like taking off all your clothes and walking into a refugee camp in Germany with a big pile of in your hand. Simply horribly retarded. Forget it, just press the fast forward button. Subai finally took his hands out of his pockets, kicked the ground hard with one leg, and shot straight towards the Rakshasa man like a cannonball. The Rakshasa man subconsciously stood up with all his strength. The harpoon in his hand suddenly flashed with lightning and thunder, and the silver snake danced wildly. At the same time, a black flame that seemed to come from hell rose from his body. However, Subai just followed him regardless. When the harpoon stabbed him, Subai's right hand directly grabbed the harpoon. When his left hand reached for the Rakshasa man's neck, he was restrained by the Rakshasa man's left hand. The power of lightning and black flames instantly spread to Subai's body, causing Subai great pain and injury, but Subai didn't even frown. At the same time, the zombie evil aura and cold poison on his body suddenly disappeared. It burst out and hit the Rakshasa man hard, and the Rakshasa man's face immediately showed a look of pain. In fact, the pain endured by both parties was almost the same, but Subai's aura was not disordered at all, and his expression did not change at all. Seeing this scene, the pressure in Rakshasa man's heart became even greater, and he even felt a sense of despair. It felt like he was completely crushed by Subai in the competition of momentum. And after 10 seconds of enduring this biting cold poison and the zombie aura that almost scratched the depths of his soul, Rakshasa man could no longer handle it. He began to retreat subconsciously, giving in proactively, wanting to get rid of this pain. When we meet on a narrow road, the brave one wins. At the critical moment of the stalemate between the two sides, whichever side cannot hold back first will be completely defeated. How could Subai, who has rich combat experience, miss this opportunity to beat the drowned dog? When the Rakshasa man retreated, Subai approached him. The skin on his right hand was torn apart and the bones were almost exposed. However, he just snatched the harpoon from the Rakshasa man's hand. The Rakshasa man had a bad heart and was about to go all out to snatch his magical weapon back. You must know that even with the magical weapon, he is no match for the terrifying existence in front of him. Without the magical weapon, how can he fight? However, Subai turned into a blood mist at this moment, passed directly through the Rakshasa man, and appeared behind the Rakshasa man. Immediately afterwards, he turned his wrist without looking, and the harpoon shook out a dazzling golden color, and penetrated directly into the vagina under the Rakshasa man's back. Subai took advantage of the situation and said. Most of the harpoon thorn was inserted almost completely from that position, and the tip pierced the Rakshasa man's belly from bottom to top. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 415. The bloody harpoon drips with dazzling red. This scene gives people the feeling of a tight back door. This is not Subai's intention, it is really just a coincidence, but obviously, Su Dong and Ni Lan, who are also paying attention to the situation here, will not believe it. They will only think that it is caused by Subai himself. Special interest. After all, there shouldn't be too many people with various quirks in the audience. Any quirks that are unimaginable and unacceptable to ordinary people are nothing more than normal in the eyes of the audience. After all, they have experienced life and death again and again. A narrow escape from death, and under the pressure of terrorist broadcasts, normal people will become abnormal. Over there, Nilan and Sudong also started fighting. It felt similar to Sudbai's side, but because Sudbai's side started and ended first, Rakshasa Man was completely crushed in almost 2 rounds. The result of death greatly stimulated the other 2 people on the battlefield. They did not dare to advance rashly and just resisted conservatively. This forced Nilan and Sudong to spend more time to resolve this battle. After all, what they also want is to kill their opponents at the minimum cost. Sudbai turned around and looked at the Rakshasa man who was crucified on the ground. In a daze, Sudbai suddenly had an illusion, who was judging whom. Although according to the temperament of horror broadcasts, it likes to take its time step by step and follow the rhythm, but this first dish is a bit too watery. Immediately afterwards, when Sudbai followed his habit of groping for the things on the corpse suddenly shattered into pieces, and the body turned into dust and flew out. At this time, the harpoon, ring, and other magical weapons they all turned into fly ash and were directly annihilated. Almost instantly, there was only a handful of dust left in front of Sudbai, and nothing of value was gone. Although Sudbai knew that whether it was Rakshasa man's harpoon or ring, it would be difficult for him to bring it out of the story world, he still had a little bit of luck and wondered if he could pick it up and use it temporarily in this glass-encircled environment. Yes, it seems now that terrorist broadcast really doesn't give him and others any chance to take advantage. Putting his hands in the pockets of his windbreaker again, Sudbai pursed his lips. To be honest, until now, Sudbai was a little disappointed. The danger he faced was far from enough to make him completely excited. It was not as exciting as expected. There is a relatively large gap in the punishing story world. Over there, Nilan and Sudong finally eliminated their opponents. Nilan left a deep visible scar on his left arm. Fortunately, the corpse poison did not successfully infiltrate into Nian's flesh and blood, but only left a scar on his left arm. The external injuries on Sudong's side were much simpler. There were no obvious injuries on his body, but he was just slightly mentally depressed. The 3 of them all eliminated their opponents. Of course, all 3 of their opponents were turned into a handful of dust, with no trace left. At this time, the surrounding space began to fold and piece together again, and the distance between the 3 people gradually became closer at this time. In the end, it returned to the beginning, and the spatial structure of this primitive forest finally returned to normal. "Brother, did you bring any cigarettes?" Sudong looked at Sudbai and asked. He shrugged, indicating that he entered the story world naked, and he definitely couldn't bring cigarettes with him. Sudbai shook his head. He was actually lying on a wicker chair in the yard wearing short-sleeved shirts without putting a cigarette on his body. This windbreaker was actually his magic weapon, a way to enter the story world and meet Ni. He only put it on when he was fighting with Lan. Damn, this is really suffocating me. I'm used to lighting up a cigarette after every murder, just like other people are used to lighting up a cigarette right after a meal. Smoke, here it comes. At this moment, Nilan suddenly spoke. Of course, it wasn't the cigarettes that came, but a smoking chimney suddenly appeared in front of the 3. Then, the environment the 3 were in suddenly changed from a virgin forest to a reinforced concrete building. Abandoned city. Diagonally to the side of the 3 people, there is a tall building. The topmost wall of the building is completely made of glass. The feeling of the glass is exactly the same as the previous glass. There are 9 trial tables inside the glass, and there are 9 figures behind the table. 3 of the judges died, and now there are only 9 people left, while there are still 3 people being judged. Unknowingly, the strength comparison between the two sides has been ebbing and flowing. I said, if we follow the previous rhythm, even if 9 of them come together and the 3 of us fight hard, there will be no chance of a comeback, Su Dong said at this time. But horror broadcasts are not that stupid, and they are not that boring either, Ni Lan said. Su Dong nodded. The location where the 3 of them are now looks like the center of this abandoned city, surrounded by steps and a fountain that has no water and is filled with garbage. A string of light points suddenly appeared in the sky. As the distance got closer, these light points began to grow in size. Finally, they fell together into the city and turned into golden points that were about as tall as a human. Cocoon. Suddenly, Subai felt a familiar breath. It seemed that he had just come into contact with this breath not long ago. Before he could distinguish it in his mind, the cocoons cracked one by one, and Subai was spared. The effort of thinking. A total of 7 cocoons cracked, and 7 people walked out of them. These 7 people were definitely not the judges. On the one hand, the shadow of the judges behind the glass window of the high-rise building did not decrease. There were still 9 people. On the other hand, these 7 people had eyes. They were all burning with blue flames, and they were obviously not normal living people. Among these 7 people, Subai knew 3 people, namely Junior and Taiza. The other one seemed to be a low-level audience member of the organization that he deliberately killed in order to test his new abilities when he got interested. If we speculate based on this, the other 4 people should be the people killed by Ni Lan and Su Dong, right? It's true that good is rewarded with good and evil is rewarded with evil. Damn, I killed the audience directly. But the aura on the far left is too weak. Su Dong looked at Ni Lan, and then he looked at Subai and said, did that guy steal a man or a woman from you, so you want to kill him? Su Dong was asking about the weakest audience member, the one Subai killed. The auras of the other 6 audience members were obviously not weak, but that one seemed to be a little out of place with those 6 people. There is no one I killed here, Ni Lan said quietly at this time. So, this means that among the 7 people, 3 were killed by Subai, and the other 4 were killed by Su Dong. They were people who were judged to have violated the regulations by the terrorist broadcast. Su Dong was a little surprised and said, if you didn't kill the audience, why were you chosen to be sent here? Before Su Dong could finish speaking, the concrete floor in front of him suddenly cracked, and the souls of the dead crawled out from underneath. After crawling out of the ground, they all stood behind the 7 audience members. They didn't think it was anything at first, but seeing their increasing number, even Su Dong was a little stunned. It turns out, no less than 1,000 people. Moreover, many of these people are very well dressed, but there are also some who are wearing the clothes of waiters and chefs, and there are also some who are wearing sailor uniforms and specific uniforms. Damn, I get it. Did you destroy a cruise ship? Su Dong looked at Ni Lan. Ni Lan did not answer, but this attitude was regarded as acquiescence. If a cruise ship was deliberately destroyed by Ni Lan, then the number of thousands of people killed on the cruise ship would not be too shocking. But now it is obvious that the lives of more than 1,000 people on the cruise ship were calculated by the terrorist broadcast. On Nien's head. But, to be honest, if it's just these defeated generals plus these shrimp soldiers and crab generals, it doesn't seem to be a big deal. Su Dong looked at Ni Lan and Subai, as long as we don't stab each other. Subai shook his head, it's impossible to stab him. Look, they are merging. Sure enough, the figures of the 7 audience members slowly began to overlap. The 7 people gradually came together and turned into one person. This man's skin was wrinkled and covered with maggots. His body was dirty and his eyes were red. He looked like an old dwarf. It seems to be hatred, it seems to be resentment. After these 7 people were brought together, they naturally transformed into such a hateful appearance. The instinct of resentment made their images naturally conform to the most disgusting image of the same kind deep in the human heart. Among the 7 audience members, there were 3 strong men who had fused their natal weapons, and 3 senior people who had not fused their natal weapons but were still very powerful. The last one, who was not a big deal, was the onlooker that Subai killed. The superposition of strength is definitely not as simple as 1 plus 1, this is an extremely terrifying increase. For example, Subai can easily kill 2 ordinary powerful people, but if these 2 powerful people fuse together, Subai will have to think carefully. Right now, it is a combination of 7 people. The dwarf old man's resentful eyes kept scanning Sudong and Subai. Obviously, at this time, his hatred was on Sudong and Subai. Immediately afterwards, more than 1,000 dead souls behind them all merged into entering the body of the dwarf old man. The aura of the dwarf old man suddenly rose to a higher level, and a layer of ghostly fire burned on his body. The oppressive and majestic breath hit my face. The dwarf old man's eyes fell heavily on Ni Lan. This scene made Subai think of Yan Huiyong. Has the strength of this freak in front of him reached that level? Sudong suddenly raised his head and looked at the window. Look, what are they doing? The figure behind the glass was obviously doing something, but it was not very clear because it was far away. Open the champagne, cheers. Subai pursed his lips and made a toast. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 416. Among the 3, Ni Lan had the most serious expression, because anyone with the right mind could see that the dwarf old man's murderous intention now fell entirely on her alone. After all, the audience is naturally stronger than ordinary people. Although the integration of more than 1,000 dead souls is a force that cannot be ignored, the individual strength of the audience is obviously much stronger. But these are useless now. After the collective fusion, their hatred condensed into a rope. 3 of them were on Subai, accounting for about 0.3%, and 4 the hatred is on Sudong, accounting for about 0.4%, but the remaining 99% or more hatred falls on Ni Lan, the person who caused the cruise ship tragedy on the parties concerned. Therefore, when the dwarf old man stretched out his hands, Sudong and Subai subconsciously kept a certain distance from Ni Lan. This was not to ignore death, because they all knew in their hearts that if they were watching the fire from the other side at this time, the next one would die. The only one is himself. Even if Ni Lan becomes the primary target, it still cannot change the nature of the 3 people's current same hatred and hatred. This is actually a posture of advancing and retreating together. Countless spider threads instantly appeared in the palm of the dwarf old man. These spider threads spread out from the palm, showing an explosive spread, but the ultimate target was still Ni Lan. Ni Lan didn't ask Subai and Sudong for help at this time. She didn't think that these 2 people would be so stupid to watch the show leisurely. As the main target, Ni Lan was really under a lot of pressure because of the aura of this dwarf old man, which caused a feeling of instinctive fear deep in her heart. This is a kind of oppression at the life level, which proves that this dwarf old man has opened a gap with himself at the absolute life level. The red lips opened, and a blood-red bead came out from Nian's mouth. The bead exuded a dazzling light, and a sharp color flashed in Nian's eyes. He pinched it with his palm, and the bead shattered into pink foam. It spread throughout her body and was quickly absorbed by her. Then she immediately opened her bow and nocked an arrow, firing 3 arrows in unison. It was like 3 meteors whizzing up, bringing with it an indomitable momentum, and Nian's target was not the spider thread that was about to approach him, but pointed directly at the dwarf old man. It means that her door is wide open now. Once the spider silk approaches, she will be instantly strangled into countless pieces and killed directly. Sudong shouted low, and the only thing left on his body, that is, the knife, immediately made a trembling sound. His figure also appeared in front of Ni Lan, and a sword flower danced out, and the surrounding people were rushing towards Ni Lan from all directions. Su Dong took the initiative to pull the spider threads over, and they were all wrapped around his knife. However, every spider silk should carry a terrifying force, so when the spider silk became more and more densely wrapped around the sword, Su Dong also felt more and more powerless, let alone at this time. Now that he is wielding the sword, it is his limit to be able to barely hold on and not let the sword fall away. Subai's figure appeared behind Su Dong, his hands stretched out, and two hellfire shotguns appeared directly in his hands, followed by continuous shooting. Golden barrages ejected from the muzzle of the hellfire shotgun, and the spider threads began to break one after another. When half of the spider threads broke, the pressure on Su Dong's body was greatly reduced. He immediately turned around and raised the nail of his right thumb. He cut his index finger, and then smeared the blood from his index finger on the blade. The blade of the broadsword immediately seemed to be covered with a layer of flames, and with Su Dong's vigorous swing, the remaining spider silk on the blade was instantly wiped out. Break. The two of them worked together to finally neutralize the offensive of these spider silks, but neither Subai nor Su Dong's expressions relaxed, because Ni did not hesitate to consume the 3 arrows shot by the bead to enhance his strength. When they were about to come into contact with the dwarf old man, the 3 arrows split into pieces, and the energy wave completely poured into the surroundings, blasting the surroundings but not harming the dwarf old man at all. The dwarf old man's eyes sank, and he stretched out his left hand. The fire in his pupils almost turned into reality at this time. The index finger of his left hand pointed at Ni, and then the whole person floated over in an extremely strange posture. His speed was not very fast, but Subai found that his consciousness could not catch him at all. At the same time, countless dwarf old men appeared in his field of vision. At this moment, whether it was his eyes or his consciousness, you can't believe it, you are all deceiving yourself. Su Dong subconsciously began to retreat. This is an instinctive fear and seeking advantages and avoiding disadvantages. The enemy is obviously constantly approaching you, but you can't even lock on the enemy. If you don't retreat at this time, are you still going to attack? After all, this is because the target of the dwarf old man has always been focused on Ni. Although Subai and Su Dong will not go to the other side to watch the fire, they will not say that they will take the initiative to bear any harm themselves. Unknown and uncertain dangers, let Ni experience it for himself first. After all, both Subai and Su Dong were actually a little bit dissatisfied with Ni's destruction of a cruise ship and the death of thousands of people. Both of them were the audience for illegal killings, while Ni was an ordinary person who killed people, just like the murderers in prison look down on rapists, rapes, and rapists, even though they are not good things. Ni also noticed that Subai and Su Dong took the initiative to retreat. Both of them deliberately pushed her in front, providing the dwarf old man with the convenience of finding his position. On this point, Ni was not so anxious as to curse. But while the effect of his red beads had not faded, he directly drew out his military spur and rushed forward. This is in line with Ni's style. When she encountered him before, she also confronted him head-on without any regard. This woman has a really hot temper. When Ni took the initiative to rush forward, Subai and Su Dong immediately responded from the side. With Ni taking the initiative to step on the mines, the two of them would undoubtedly be much more calm. Ding! A crisp sound sounded, and the tip of Ni's military thorn happened to be in contact with the tip of the left index finger of the dwarf old man in front of him. The dwarf old man's body trembled, and the military thorn in Ni's hand broke directly. He spit out a mouthful of blood from the corner of his mouth, and he flew out like a paper kite with a broken string. The dwarf old man's murderous intention remained unabated, and until he killed Ni, he seemed to have no one else in his eyes. Also, more than 99% of the resentment of thousands of people is focused on Ni. Everything else can be ignored for the time being, even his own reason. Su Dong raised his sword, intending to stop the dwarf old man and buy Ni some time and opportunity to breathe, but the old man's spider silk resisted the sword directly with his chest. Sudong's mouth immediately hurt because of the knife. People's habit is that the human and the knife are one. When the knife is struck, all the subtle movements of the whole body are changing and serving the knife. So when the knife was knocked away in the most brutal way, Sudong was also knocked away. This time, he really wasn't pretending or deliberately retreating, because Sudong was in pain all over his body at this moment. He was almost paralyzed. He had no clothes on, so you could see that the skin all over his body was covered with veins, and even some muscle tissue had been severely strained, with bruises overflowing. Bloodlines rose up on Sudbai's body. Taking Sudong's lesson into account, he immediately switched to zombie state, stretched out his right hand, grabbed the dwarf old man's shoulder from the side, and pierced the old man's body with his sharp nails. It was like using himself as a chain to lock the old man here. The dwarf old man wanted to imitate the gourd and rushed forward. Sudong had left a knife wound about 2 palms wide on his chest. Although it was not serious, it had proved that this girl was not King Kong. No matter, he and others could still hurt him, and Sudbai's nails had already penetrated into the flesh and blood of the old man's shoulder, and the corpse poison had also been injected into it. However, in the next moment, as the dwarf old man rushed forward, a huge force pressed from Sudbai's fingers to his palms to his arms and then to his whole body. Even in the zombie state, Sudbai's bleeding line was stimulated. Bai's body also swayed at this time. Roar! A low roar like a beast came from Sudbai's throat. His back heel had been taken off the ground just now, but now he pressed it back hard. The dwarf old man's thrust failed, and he seemed to be stunned for a moment. Then he turned his head and glanced at Sudbai. Then, he made a fist with his other hand and hit Sudbai directly. Sudbai held the dwarf old man's shoulder with one hand, and could only use his other arm to block him in front of him. Boom! Fist collision. This time, Sudbai couldn't stand it any longer. He was knocked out and hit the ground heavily. 5 of his nails were broken, and the broken armor was embedded in the dwarf old man's shoulder. The dwarf old man didn't even look at Sudbai and Sudong, who had not yet recovered, and rushed straight towards Ni. Fortunately, because of the obstruction of Sudbai and Sudong, Ni had some time to breathe. This time she did not actively seek to attack, but began to move and retreat. Sudbai and Sudong, who were lying on the ground, looked at each other. At this time, both parties understood the terrifying strength of the old dwarf, and they also knew more clearly that they must not let the old dwarf kill Ni first. Otherwise, when Ni died, the old dwarf would be filled with hatred. His brain will wake up. He is obviously in a state of crazy revenge now. Because his hatred for Ni is too high, he just ignores the obstruction and killing of Sudbai and Sudong. When he wakes up, his IQ will be higher. After recovery, Sudbai and Sudong would have no chance at all. In the glass window on the top floor of a tall building in the distance, a man was holding a glass of champagne. He didn't drink it, but just stared blankly at the scene below. Will he die? Another person heard this and immediately laughed and said, It's them, right? Haha, it seems that they will all die this time, otherwise if the next round of broadcasts will randomly select 3 of us to fight against them if. Tisk tisk, anyway, I am too scared to bear it. The 3 people before have proved that even if our strength is improved and our magic weapons are upgraded, we are still no match for those genuine veterans. We are really going to be tortured and killed.